So what we do in this paper is we get an unusually large data set. We can track 3 million, we start with 3 million children, and we track not all of them, but a large subset of them from childhood into early adulthood, into their late 20s. Okay? We're going to develop a new method, which is a sort of a quasi-experimental test for bias in value-added methods. So we're going to rely on old methods first, but we're also going to show some new methodological evidence on this point. And once we've hopefully convinced you, I mean, the thrust of this presentation, most of it is convincing you that standardized test score measures can be an unbiased measure of teacher performance. Although they might capture, not every dimension of teacher performance, they can, in an unbiased way, capture a dimension of teacher performance. All right? And then once you believe that this estimate captures something real, then the next question is, okay, are the children who get these high value-added teachers, do they do better in adulthood? Okay? Because we might find that this is true and this is not true. It may be the case that getting the teacher that raises your test scores when you're 12 years old doesn't actually lead you to have a better job, or a higher paying job, at least as we'll measure it. Whoops. And then we have low stakes test environment, which makes manipulation less central here. Let me get into the data. We look at data from one large school district. We have teacher and class assignments for roughly 2.5 million children that span the years 1991 through 2009, so almost 20 years of data. And we have test scores that start a little bit earlier, which is important because we always want to condition on prior test score history as a way of trying to level that playing field across classrooms. That's going to be an extremely important control variable. We've got 18 million test scores from grades 3 through 8. So in this district, they test math and English language every year from grade 3 through grade 8, which is going to be very important because in order to capture the impact of an individual teacher, you need some measure of where that child started out, which will be last year's, the test score from the end of the prior year, and then a measure of where the child is after having this teacher for 1 year, and that's this year's test score. And without annual testing, this is very difficult. If you only test every 5 years, then there's no way of saying what the individual contribution is of any single teacher over that 5-year period. You only get some cumulative impact of all the teachers that student has had over the time period. So you need annual testing. Okay? And what we do is we have these scaled scores that the psychometricians measure, that the test. We're going to standardize those to be mean 0, standard deviation 1, kind of a z-score, a normalized variable. So you can interpret our effect estimates as standard deviations. And it turns out that this district is diverse enough that 1 standard deviation in this district is equivalent to 1 standard deviation at the national level. So you can think about this as 1 standard deviation for the United States. That's a reasonable way to think about these estimates. What we do exclude, and that's important, we exclude some specialized schools and classrooms that only focus on disabled students, special education students, okay? Students with learning disabilities in this school district, they're often taught in separate schools if they have severe learning disabilities, or even separate classrooms, and they don't take these tests. Because of their learning disabilities, they're given alternative type of assessments, and so we're excluding them from the analysis. So that's just one important caveat, because those classrooms may be different, and it may be more difficult to use standardized paper and pencil tests in mathematics and English to measure performance of teachers who work with very disabled children. Okay, they're just not in our sample. Yeah.
Do you know how many of them are in the class? Because maybe
yes,
if you're in a class
we do.
Many,
yes, we observe all the students. You're right, and we will measure that because we do not exclude all disabled students. We only exclude those disabled students who are isolated in a specialized school or a specialized classroom. So those disabled students with a learning disability who are integrated into a classroom, so let's say you have 25 children, 3 or 4 of whom have a disability, they are in our sample, and we will control for, as a variable, the fraction of your peers who have a learning disability and whether you yourself have a learning disability in our analysis. So we do observe them. We don't exclude all disabled kids, just we exclude most of the very disabled kids, because those students that have severe learning disabilities are usually put in separate classrooms or specialized schools. The other data, and this was what makes the project so different from earlier work that I've done on evaluating teachers in schools, is we can match the school district data to selected information from United States tax records. My co-authors are part of a special research program at the U.S. Treasury that allows them to bring in outside data and link it in a very safe and secure environment to tax records. And from the tax records, we get an incredible amount of information on these individuals. So we'll know a lot about their earnings. This data extends back to 1996. We'll get a bunch of earnings. So I'll translate some of the codes here. A W-2 is the record you get of how much you earned last year. So even if you don't pay taxes in the United States, let's say you earn very little money, you're not required to pay taxes because you earn so little amount of money. You don't have to file a tax return to send anything to the government, but the government still gets information about how much you earn because your employer has to send the government a record of how much you were paid. Okay? And that's the W-2. So we have lots of information about earnings through these records. And we'll also have another important piece of information we'll have is attendance at a university, a college or a university. And the reason that comes through tax records is because universities in the United States have to send to the government a record of everybody who attended. And the reason why is because in the United States, you get a tax credit for paying tuition. So if you go and you pay tuition at a university, let's say you go to Columbia University and you pay tuition there, you can go to the government and then claim a reduction in your taxes for having paid tuition. How is the government supposed to check if you actually went to Columbia University? Well, they get a form from Columbia that lists all of the students who went there and the tuition that they paid, if any. Okay? So the government can check. So what's great about that is that even without going to any of the universities, just through the tax system, we'll know university attendance for all of these students. We won't know the major that they have. We don't know their grades. We don't know if they graduated, but we do know if they've attended. Okay? We'll also be able to measure a proxy for teenage birth, which is, do you claim as a dependent on your tax return a child who was born when you were a teenager? Okay? And then we'll also measure neighborhood quality, sort of where are you living, and we measure that using the fraction of adults in your postal code who have a college diploma. Okay? So kind of just the quality of the neighborhood you're living in. What we also have, which is very interesting, is we have parental characteristics, because we'll know who claims who claims these individuals as dependents when they're children. And so we'll know information about their parents. And that's going to be very important because we are not going to use these measures as control variables in our analysis of teacher performance. Because a school district or a state department of education would never have access to this kind of information. So we're going to hold these variables out, and later then we're going to put them back in and say, are our measures of teacher performance correlated with parental characteristics? Because if they are, you would be worried, right? Because you'd be worried that you're picking up something about the students and not something about the teachers. And what I'll show you later is, it turns out that our measures of teacher performance are not correlated with parental characteristics once you've controlled for the student characteristics like prior test score history, etc. Okay, and we have a pretty great match rate. We can get over 90% of the students in the data.
Do you have the problem of people who have left to other countries? So if you have so we do have a problem where if you leave the country, we won't catch you. We won't catch you. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the U.S., that's less of an issue. Most of these students don't even leave New York City. But you're right. If you leave the country, and look, some of these students will have died by the time they're in their late 20s. So we'll miss some set of students who disappear. Yes?
I was just curious, what district was it that you guys researched?
I'll tell you afterwards. I'm on the microphone. But it's not a big deal, but we told the district when they offered us the data that we'd keep their name not public. Okay. But it is a very large, I'll show you some characteristics of the data set. It's a very large, poor urban school district. Okay.